Justice doesn't always wear a badge, but in Oakwood County, it often did. On a quiet morning in Georgia, a black family pulled into a rural diner expecting nothing more than a peaceful breakfast. Sheriff Cotton and his deputy saw easy targets: a polite man, his wife, and their teenage son, who they thought needed reminding of their place. To them, Darius Samuels was just another name, another face, but they didn't know the man they were dealing with. Beneath his calm demeanor was a Navy SEAL, a man trained under fire, ready to survive and fight back. When their harassment turned into a confrontation, they didn't realize they'd pushed a man who knew how to defend himself and those he loved. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The morning sun bathed Georgia's highways in a golden hue as Darius Samuels packed the last bag into their black SUV. The weekend had been just what the family needed. Aunt Martha's cooking, her endless stories, and the warmth of Savannah's hospitality had rejuvenated them all. "Did you double-check the guest room?" Tasha asked from the passenger seat, glasses perched on her nose as she glanced at their route. "Yes, ma'am," Darius replied with a grin, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came naturally to him. "Check the bathroom, the kitchen, and even under the porch swing where Malik hides his phone to avoid AP Physics homework." "Dad!" Malik protested from the back seat, glancing up from his phone. "Just one time too many," Darius chuckled, closing the trunk with a solid thud. His movements were deliberate, a habit honed from years of military discipline. "You and Mom didn't raise me to hide from challenges," Darius added as he walked around to the driver's side. "No, we raised him to face them head on, just like his father," Tasha said, squeezing his hand as he slid into the driver's seat. With the engine humming to life, they pulled away from Aunt Martha's cozy blue house, its white trim and overflowing flower boxes. Darius adjusted the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of Malik's reflection. The boy had grown so much over the past year, not just in height, but in confidence. The once shy teenager who avoided homework was now talking about engineering scholarships. "So, can we talk about what Aunt Martha said about your SEAL training?" "The part about you swimming with sharks?" Malik asked, leaning forward between the front seats. Darius kept his eyes on the road, but smiled slightly. "Your aunt has a way of turning every story into a tall tale. It wasn't sharks, it was just very angry dolphins." "Very angry dolphins?" Tasha raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like a story worth hearing," she added with a smile. "Not much to tell," Darius shrugged, but his family knew better. That shrug always preceded one of his best stories. "Come on, Dad, you can't just leave us hanging like that," Malik pressed. Darius sighed, merging onto the highway. All right. It was during my second phase of training. We were doing long-distance swimming exercises off the coast of San Diego." The story unfolded as the miles rolled by, punctuated by laughter and questions. Darius had a way of making even the most intense moments sound like casual adventures. He never boasted about his accomplishments, and most people never knew about his decorated military career unless it was necessary. As the morning stretched on, their conversation shifted from dolphins to Malik's upcoming robotics competition and Tasha's plans for her third-grade class science fair. The SUV's climate control kept them comfortable despite the growing Georgia heat outside. "You know what I'm thinking about?" Tasha said, scrolling through her phone. "Breakfast, a real breakfast, not just coffee and granola bars." "I could eat," Malik agreed eagerly. "We passed like 3 Waffle Houses already." "How about we try something local?" Darius suggested, scanning the upcoming exit signs. "Sometimes these little places have the best food." They drove another 20 minutes, the highway giving way to more rural surroundings. The trees lined the road, their branches casting patterns of light and shadow on the asphalt. Small farms dotted the landscape, and occasional billboards advertised local businesses in faded paint. Tasha pointed to a sign. "My place, next exit. Reviews say they have great biscuits and gravy." Darius nodded, signaling to take the exit. The off-ramp led them down a two-lane road past a gas station with rusted pumps and a small grocery store with sun-bleached advertisements. My Place sat at the end of a gravel parking lot, a white-painted building with blue trim that had seen better days. The lot was half full, mostly pickup trucks and a few sedans with local county plates. Darius pulled into a spot near the entrance, turning off the engine. The silence was broken by the sound of gravel crunching under tires as another car pulled in behind them. "Well, this looks interesting," Malik said, unbuckling his seatbelt. Darius could feel the tension in the air as the man entered, his presence like a heavy fog filling the room. The sound of boots on the floor and the faint creak of leather was all too familiar. The atmosphere in the diner shifted, like a quiet ripple turning into an uneasy wave. Some of the patrons straightened in their seats, while others seemed to shrink back into themselves. Betty, the waitress, seemed to tighten her grip on the coffee pot, her movements becoming just a little more deliberate. "Morning, Officer Mallister," came a greeting from one of the regulars at the counter, a voice tinged with familiarity, but careful not to overstep. "Morning, folks," replied Officer Mallister, his tone casual, but it was clear from the way the air around him seemed to change that he was someone whose presence commanded attention. The sound of his boots continued as he moved deeper into the diner, unaware of the ripple of discomfort that followed in his wake. Darius didn't need to turn around to know who it was. He'd encountered enough situations like this to recognize the feeling in the room. It was a subtle shift, like an invisible hand tightening the grip on the space, yet Darius kept his focus on his family. He didn't let the presence of this officer or the discomfort of the surroundings dictate his actions. Instead, he remained calm, his family grounded in the moment. He'd learned long ago that sometimes the best form of resistance wasn't loud or brash. It was quiet, steady, and deliberate. As the officer continued to move further into the diner, the eyes of the room subtly shifted. A few whispered exchanges started up again, but the Samuels family stayed rooted, undisturbed, creating their own quiet space in the middle of it all. Just by being there, they were asserting something more powerful than any conflict, ownership of the moment, and the strength that comes from simply existing in a place, unapologetically. Betty returned to their table with the coffee cups and a fresh pot, steam rising from the cups in the soft morning light. The simple act of pouring the coffee seemed to almost restore the normal rhythm of the diner. Though Darius knew that nothing would be the same after this, the battle was never just about what happened next. Sometimes it was about how you held your ground, how you moved through the world without bending. "Ready to order?" Betty asked, her voice steady, though Darius noticed the subtle tremor that hadn't been there before. Before anyone could answer, the bell above the door jingled again, and a new presence entered the diner. The heavy sound of boots and the shifting of leather gear were unmistakable. Officer Mallister had company, and once again, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Some patrons straightened their backs, while others shrank into their seats. But the Samuels family remained unchanged, rooted in their space, a silent testament to the quiet power of presence. Malik's eyes met his father's across the table. Darius gave a nearly imperceptible nod, a silent gesture that spoke volumes. "Stay calm. We're fine. We're just having breakfast." Betty cleared her throat softly. "About those orders?" she asked, her pencil poised above her notepad. "Yes," Tasha replied, her voice steady and composed. "I'll have the biscuits and gravy with a side of fruit, please." The sound of boots grew louder as Betty jotted down Tasha's order. Darius could feel his son's leg bouncing slightly under the table, not from fear, but from that tension that comes with being young, black, and under scrutiny. For a moment, everything seemed amplified. The soft scrape of silverware, the low murmur of nearby conversations. But Malik's discomfort was palpable. "And for you, sir?" Betty asked, her eyes moving to Darius, her pencil hovering over the pad. The Boots had stopped behind their booth, the weight of the officer's presence lingering. Darius kept his focus on the menu, his voice as calm and polite as ever. "I'll have the breakfast special. Eggs over easy, and yes, those hash browns with jalapenos sound perfect." The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across their booth as Betty wrote down his order. She turned to Malik last, her pencil tapping impatiently on the pad. "And for you, young man?" she asked, her tone sharper, more clipped than when she'd addressed his parents. Malik straightened in his seat. "The French toast combo, please, with bacon." Betty scribbled down the order without another word and walked away, her shoes clicking against the floor. The sound seemed louder now, competing with the clink of silverware and the low hum of conversations. Malik leaned back, trying to seem relaxed, but his shoulders remained tense. "Well, she's definitely not winning any customer service awards today," Malik muttered. "Malik," Tasha warned quietly, though her eyes were darting around the diner, picking up on the sideways glances and whispered comments from nearby tables. "What? I'm just saying what we're all thinking," Malik replied, picking up his coffee cup, taking a sip, and making a face. "And this coffee tastes like it's been sitting here since yesterday." Darius watched his son over the rim of his own cup. "Sometimes coffee is just coffee, son. No need to make it more than that." But Malik knew, and so did Darius, that it wasn't just the coffee. A couple at the booth behind them had gone silent, their forks scraping their plates with deliberate slowness. Two men at the counter kept turning around, their eyes lingering a bit too long before returning to their meals. Tasha pulled her purse closer to her, a habit she'd developed over the years. Her fingers drummed lightly on the table, and she kept glancing toward the kitchen, perhaps wondering how long their food would take. "So," she said, forcing brightness into her voice, "tell me more about that engineering program you were looking at, Malik." "The one in Atlanta." Malik began to answer, but his words were drowned out by a burst of laughter from the counter. Officer Mallister had settled onto a stool, his utility belt creaking as he leaned forward. He was talking to the cook through the service window, his voice carrying deliberately across the diner. "And then I told him, 'Boy, you better think real careful about your next move,'" Mallister's voice rang out. Laughter followed. Malik's jaw clenched. Darius reached across the table and gently covered his son's clenched fist. "That engineering program," he said. "Tell us more." Malik took a deep breath, uncurling his fingers. "Yeah, well, they have this amazing robotics lab and internship opportunities." Just as he began to relax, the clatter of a plate hitting the table broke his focus. Betty returned, setting their food down with more force than necessary. The biscuits on Tasha's plate slid into the gravy, and some of Malik's syrup sloshed onto the table. "Anything else?" Betty asked, already turning to leave. "Actually," Tasha spoke up, her voice firm but polite, "could we get some napkins and maybe some cream for the coffee?" Betty paused, then nodded curtly. She returned a moment later, dropping a stack of napkins on the table without a word. "Thank you," Darius said, his voice steady. They began eating, trying to focus on their food and each other rather than the tension surrounding them. Malik cut into his French toast, telling them about the 3D printing lab at the university between bites. Tasha asked questions, her voice a little too bright, while Darius listened, occasionally glancing around the diner with practiced casualness. Despite the tension, the food was actually good. The hash browns were crispy and spicy, just as promised. Tasha's biscuits were fresh and fluffy, covered in pepper-flecked gravy. Even Malik's French toast was golden brown and perfectly cooked, dusted with powdered sugar. "Not bad," Malik admitted, managing a small, genuine smile. "Maybe we should come back tomorrow." "Very funny," Tasha said, but she smiled too, the tension easing from her shoulders. As they ate, a new customer entered the diner, the bell above the door jingling. The man nodded to Officer Mallister, who was still holding court at the counter. "Morning, Brent." "Quiet Sunday," the newcomer said. "So far," Mallister replied, his voice carrying across the diner. Just keeping an eye on things. You know how it is these days. Can't be too careful." Tasha's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She set it down slowly, the weight of the moment settling in. Her eyes met Darius's, and in that shared glance, years of understanding passed between them. Moments like these were all too familiar. Malik, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, stabbed at his remaining French toast. "Mom, you okay? You've barely touched your food," he asked, concern creeping into his voice. "I'm fine, baby," Tasha replied, picking up her fork again with a forced calm. "Just taking my time." The diner had grown noticeably quieter, the hum of conversation dying down as Officer Mallister's voice seemed to fill the space. His words landed heavily, like stones dropping into still water. "You know what I always say," Mallister continued, swiveling in his stool to face the diner at large. "A uniform means something in this town. It demands respect." A few customers nodded in agreement, while others suddenly found their meals more interesting than before. The cook, who had been visible in the service window moments earlier, had disappeared. Darius continued to eat with precise movements, his posture unchanged, but his eyes never stopped moving. He was tracking every shift in the room, every subtle glance, every meaningful shift in the air. He'd learned long ago that situations like this could turn in an instant. "Dad," Malik said quietly, but Darius's voice was firm, low but resolute. "Maybe we should finish your breakfast, son." "We have every right to be here," Darius added, his tone a calm assertion of their space. Betty appeared with the coffee pot, moving quickly and efficiently, though she didn't make eye contact with anyone. When she reached their table, her hands shook slightly, spilling a few drops of coffee onto the table. "Sorry," she muttered, the first hint of vulnerability in her voice. She hurried away before anyone could respond, leaving behind an uneasy silence. Was it fear? Shame? The unspoken tension seemed to hang in the air. Tasha dabbed at the coffee drops with a napkin, her movements controlled, but her fingers trembling slightly. Years of experience had taught her the signs, the subtle clues that something more might be brewing. At the counter, Officer Mallister turned fully in their direction. His eyes slowly moved over their family, taking his time, lingering on each of them with deliberate slowness. His lips curled into a smirk that never quite reached his eyes. "Well, well," he said, just loud enough to carry. "Looks like we've got ourselves some visitors." The diner seemed to hold its breath. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, forks frozen halfway to mouths. Even the sizzle from the grill seemed quiet. Darius remained calm, continuing to eat as if nothing had changed. Tasha straightened her spine, chin lifting slightly, her defiance subtle but present. Malik, watching his father, tried to mirror the composure, but the flicker of anger in his eyes betrayed his emotions. Mallister's smirk widened as he watched their reactions, or lack thereof. He turned back to the counter, but his posture remained telling, his hand casually resting on his utility belt, fingers drumming near his holster as if making a point of his readiness. The morning sun streamed through the windows, but its warmth seemed to have drained away. The food, once inviting, now tasted bland. The coffee grew cold in their cups, and yet they sat, dignified, finishing their meal as if nothing were wrong, as if the heavy shadow creeping over their table wasn't settling with increasing weight. Mallister finally pushed away from the counter, adjusting his belt with an exaggerated show of confidence. His boots clicked deliberately against the linoleum as he approached their table, each step a calculated move. The background noise of the diner faded to whispers, the clink of silverware now distant. "Morning, folks," Mallister said as he positioned himself at the end of their booth, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Just doing my regular Sunday check-in, making sure everyone's having a pleasant breakfast." Darius nodded once, polite but reserved. "Everything's fine, officer, thank you." Mallister's gaze moved to Malik, who was doing his best to remain calm, though his discomfort was palpable. "Haven't seen you around here before," Mallister remarked, his voice laced with condescension. "You boys passing through?" We're on our way home from visiting family, Tasha answered, her voice steady, though Darius could feel the tension in her shoulders. Is that right? Mallister asked, pulling out his notepad, though he didn't seem to be writing anything down. Interesting timing. We had some trouble at the convenience store down the road last night. A young man about your age. He gestured at Malik with his pen. You look like you might match the description. Malik's fork clattered against his plate. I was with my family all weekend. Son, Darius interjected, his voice a gentle warning. Mallister's smile widened, his eyes narrowing. How old are you, boy? 17, Malik replied, his voice tight. 17, Mallister repeated slowly, as if testing the sound of it. Got any ID on you? Tasha's hand found Malik's under the table, a subtle but protective gesture. He's a minor officer, and he's with his parents. Ma'am, I'm just doing my job, Mallister said, his tone sharpening with an edge of authority. When there's been a crime reported, we have to follow up on all leads. Darius met Mallister's gaze, his own steady and unyielding. What exactly was stolen? Mallister shifted his weight, his hand resting near his holster, as if he was daring Darius to challenge him further. That's police business, he said, his smile never faltering. But since you're asking so many questions, maybe you wouldn't mind showing me some identification. The diner was silent, every eye glued to the tense standoff unfolding in real time. Tasha's fork hung motionless in the air as her appetite vanished, the weight of the situation sinking in. Her eyes met Darius's, a shared understanding passing between them, one forged by years of experience. Malik, sensing the change in the air, prodded at his French toast, though his mind was far from it. Mom, you okay? You've barely touched your food, he asked, his voice quiet with concern. I'm fine, baby, Tasha replied, her voice controlled but tight. Just taking my time. The atmosphere in the diner had thickened, the chatter falling away as Officer Mallister's voice grew louder, almost filling the entire room with its heavy, deliberate tone. You know what I always say, Mallister said, swiveling on his stool to face the entire diner. A uniform means something in this town. It demands respect. Some patrons nodded in agreement, while others quickly focused on their plates, avoiding eye contact. The cook, who had been behind the service window, had disappeared. Betty, the waitress, stood frozen, the coffee pot suspended mid-pour, her hand shaking slightly. Darius continued eating, his movements precise and deliberate. His posture was unchanged, but his eyes moved constantly, tracking every shift, every look. He had seen these moments too many times, knowing that they could turn in an instant. Maybe we should finish your breakfast, son, Darius said quietly, his voice low but firm. We have every right to be here, Darius added, his voice calm but filled with unspoken authority. Betty, shaking slightly, refilled coffee cups around the diner, avoiding eye contact with anyone. When she reached their table, her hands trembled slightly, sloshing coffee onto the tablecloth. Sorry, she muttered, her voice betraying something other than the typical curt professionalism. Fear? Shame? She hurried away, leaving behind a heavy silence. Tasha dabbed at the coffee with a napkin, trying to keep her composure, though her fingers trembled slightly. She had been through enough situations like this to know exactly what was happening, and what might come next. Officer Mallister turned fully toward their booth, his gaze slowly moving over each member of the family. His eyes lingered on Malik, then his lips curled into a smirk. Well, well, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Looks like we've got ourselves some visitors. The entire diner seemed to hold its breath. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks froze in midair. Even the sound of sizzling from the grill ceased. Darius kept his focus on his plate, but his calmness was like the quiet before a storm. Tasha straightened, her spine a little stiffer now, her chin slightly lifted. Malik looked at his parents, trying to mirror his father's composure, but the anger and uncertainty in his eyes couldn't be fully hidden. Mallister's smirk widened as he watched them, or more accurately, watched their lack of reaction. He turned back to the counter, but his stance made it clear he wasn't done. His hand rested casually on his utility belt, fingers tapping near his holster. The sun continued to stream through the windows, casting long shadows across the scene. The Confederate flag near the kitchen loomed in the background, silent, but seemingly witnessing everything. The food on their plates had turned tasteless, the coffee growing cold, and yet the Samuels family sat there with unshakable dignity, continuing their meal as if nothing were wrong, as if the air in the room wasn't thick with impending tension. Officer Mallister finally pushed himself away from the counter, adjusting his belt with exaggerated showmanship. His boots clicked loudly against the linoleum as he approached the booth, each step deliberate and slow. The rest of the diner seemed to fall away in the background. The soft clink of silverware, the quiet whispers, they all became a faint hum as Mallister positioned himself at the end of the table. "Morning, folks," he said, his smile cold and calculated. "Just doing my regular Sunday check-in, making sure everyone's having a pleasant breakfast." Darius nodded once, his politeness masking the steel in his words. "Everything's fine, officer. Thank you." But Mallister's eyes remained on Malik, who had been trying to maintain a neutral expression, but couldn't fully hide his discomfort. "Haven't seen you around here before," Mallister said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You boys passing through?" "We're on our way home from visiting family," Tasha answered, her voice steady despite the tension seeping into her shoulders. "Is that right?" Mallister asked, pulling out his notepad, though he didn't make any notes. "Interesting timing. We had some trouble at the convenience store down the road last night. A young man about your age." He pointed his pen at Malik. "You look like you might match the description." Malik's fork clattered against his plate. "I was with my family all weekend, son," Darius said calmly, his voice like a soft warning. Mallister's smile widened again, as if he were savoring the discomfort. "How old are you, boy?" 17, Malik answered, his voice tight, unwilling to back down. 17, Mallister repeated, stretching the word out with a mocking emphasis. "Got any ID on you?" Tasha's hand found Malik's under the table, squeezing it gently. "He's a minor, officer, and he's with his parents." "Ma'am, I'm just doing my job," Mallister said, his tone sharpening, his authority swelling. "When there's been a crime reported, we have to follow up on all leads." Darius met Mallister's gaze, unwavering. What exactly was stolen? Mallister shifted his weight, still resting a hand near his holster. "That's police business," he said, his voice barely contained. "But since you're asking so many questions, maybe you wouldn't mind showing me some identification." The tension in the diner thickened, and in that charged moment, it seemed as though everything was about to break. The movement was fluid, a perfect blend of control and technique. In one seamless motion, Darius twisted Officer Mallister's arm behind his back, applying just the right amount of leverage. There was no violence, no jerking or harsh movements, only the calm efficiency of a trained professional at work. Mallister's eyes widened in shock as he was guided downward, his knees buckling as if he'd decided to kneel of his own accord. Malik stepped back, rubbing his arm where Mallister's fingers had dug into it. Tasha remained seated, her face a mixture of concern and grim satisfaction. She'd seen this side of her husband before, but rarely in public. "Stay still," Darius said quietly, maintaining the hold with minimal pressure. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will maintain this position until you calm down." The other diners sat frozen, watching the scene unfold in stunned silence. Betty, the waitress, stood by the coffee maker, her hand pressed to her mouth, eyes wide in disbelief. The cook, having returned to the service window, was tense, his face tight with concern. The morning's serenity had been shattered. Mallister tried to struggle, but each movement only made the hold more secure. His face twisted, not from exertion, but from embarrassment. "This is assault on a police officer," he sputtered. "You're going to prison for this." "No," Darius replied calmly, his voice steady. "This is a trained professional preventing you from violating my son's civil rights. I haven't hurt you, and I won't unless you force me to." A young patron at the counter, having pulled out his phone, whispered to his companion, "That's some special forces stuff right there. Look at that wrist control. That's not regular self-defense." He was right. The technique Darius had employed was a specialized combination of Krav Maga and military close-quarters combat. Designed specifically to neutralize armed opponents without causing injury, it was a technique taught only to elite military units. It was flawless, simple, yet layered with tactical sophistication. "Sir?" called a voice from near the door. A retired Marine stood up, recognizing the situation for what it was. "I've got your back if you need it." Darius nodded in acknowledgement, but kept his focus on Mallister. "I appreciate that, but this situation is under control." More phones were now recording, capturing every angle of the scene. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the tableau as if a spotlight had been cast upon them. The calm, composed black man in civilian clothes stood over the red-faced police officer. Power dynamics reversed, yet no violence had been used. As the sirens began to wail in the distance, Mallister's lips twisted into a savage smile. "That's backup coming," he snarled. "You're done now, boy. You and your whole family are going away for a long time." Darius held the position for 2 more seconds before releasing Mallister with the same controlled precision that he had used to subdue him. He stepped back, raising both hands in a gesture of compliance. Mallister scrambled to his feet, reaching for his holster with shaking hands. But in the chaos, something had fallen from Darius's pocket. A wallet, now open on the floor. Its contents were clear for all to see. A silver badge, rows of colorful ribbons, and several medals visible beneath the ID. An elderly man sitting nearest to the scene bent down to look, his eyes widening as he read aloud, "United States Navy SEAL, Silver Star recipient, Combat Action Ribbon, Bronze Star with Valor device." He looked up at Darius with newfound respect, his voice trembling as he spoke. "Son, you're a decorated Navy SEAL." The diner erupted in murmurs. Mallister's face, once flush with anger, now drained of color. The sirens grew louder, but now their sound seemed to bring a different kind of weight, the weight of consequences, though perhaps not for the officer who had initiated the escalation. The cook, who had been watching the scene unfold, let out a low whistle. Betty, still frozen by the counter, looked as if she might faint. The retired Marine by the door stood a little straighter, offering a subtle nod of respect. Malik and Tasha remained perfectly still, their expressions masks of controlled emotion. They knew the drill. Stay calm. Let Darius handle it. Document everything. Malik's phone was now recording, capturing every detail. The contents of Darius's wallet were laid bare for everyone nearby to see. Deployment photos, additional commendations, security clearance cards. Each item told part of a story that Mallister was only beginning to understand, the story of exactly whom he had chosen to harass that morning. The sirens were very close now, their wail filling the diner with an uneasy mix of red and blue light that strobed through the windows. Mallister's hand still hovered near his holster, but now his posture had shifted. The confidence was gone, replaced by uncertainty as his eyes flickered between Darius's raised hands and the ID wallet on the floor, trying to reconcile the boy he had been threatening with the decorated warrior standing before him. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, casting long shadows that danced across the scene. The Confederate flag, once looming large, now seemed to hang forgotten. its implied threat overshadowed by the reality of true strength, discipline, and dignity on display. Every phone in the diner remained raised, capturing the unfolding scene. Every eye stayed fixed on the standoff. Every breath seemed held in anticipation of what would happen when the sirens arrived. The next few moments would decide much, but one thing was already clear. Officer Mallister's morning had not gone according to plan. The backup officers burst through the diner doors, weapons drawn, the peaceful morning shattered completely as they barked commands, forcing everyone to back away from Mallister and Darius. "On your knees! Hands behind your head!" an officer yelled, his gun trained on Darius. Darius complied smoothly, his movements deliberate and calm. He'd been in worse situations, faced deadlier threats. This was familiar ground, though the injustice of it simmered in his gut. "Wait!" The elderly man who had read Darius's credentials scrambled forward, the ID wallet still in his hand. "Officers, there's been a mistake. This man is a decorated Navy SEAL." Mallister snatched the wallet from his hand and shoved it into his pocket. "This thug assaulted a police officer," he declared, his voice rising. "He's under arrest." Tasha stood up, her teacher's authority cutting through the tension. "That's a lie," she snapped. "Officer Mallister was harassing our son. My husband only defended him." "Ma'am, step back or you'll be arrested too," Mallister warned, his color returning as he regained control over the situation. "Mom, they can't do this!" Malik started to move forward, but Tasha grabbed his arm, holding him back. Her fingers dug into his sleeve as she fought to keep him from escalating the situation, from giving them any excuse. The other diners still held their phones up, recording. The retired Marine at the door looked ready to intervene, but Darius caught his eye and gave a slight shake of his head. More violence wouldn't help anyone, he silently conveyed. "Cuff him," Mallister ordered, and two officers moved in. The steel bracelets clicked shut around Darius's wrists, cold and final. Betty, the waitress, finally found her voice, speaking softly but clearly. "This ain't right." Mallister wheeled around on her, his face red with anger. "You got something to say? Maybe you'd like to join him." The cook ducked behind the kitchen window, and Betty quickly retreated, shaking her head. The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. A new siren approached, its long, deep notes different from the others. A large black SUV pulled up outside, its tinted windows reflecting the morning sun. Sheriff Dale Cotton stepped out, adjusting his gun belt as he did, his brass star catching the light. The sheriff was tall and lean with iron-gray hair and eyes like chips of blue ice. He moved with the confidence of a man used to absolute authority in his domain. The officer straightened as Cotton entered, Mallister's face showing an almost palpable relief. Cotton surveyed the scene with practiced efficiency, phones still recording, the upset diners, Darius on his knees, and the barely contained fury on Malik's face. His expression gave nothing away. "Clear the diner," he ordered. When no one moved immediately, he added, "Now, or we start collecting phones and witnesses for obstruction." The threat worked. People began filing out, though many lingered just outside the windows, still trying to record. The retired Marine was the last to leave, shooting Darius an apologetic look. Tasha stepped forward, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "My husband was defending our son from harassment. He's a decorated veteran." "Ma'am," Cotton cut her off, his tone professional but firm. "I understand you're upset, but assaulting an officer is a serious offense, regardless of military service. We'll sort this out at the station." He turned to Mallister. "Transport him to the County Force substation. No booking yet. I want to handle this carefully." Malik caught the undertone in those words, the sense that the sheriff was giving Mallister a way out, one that could have very serious consequences for his family. "Mom," he whispered, "they can't just—" "Quiet," Tasha breathed, squeezing his arm harder. She'd heard it too. She knew the game was changing. The officers hauled Darius to his feet. He stood straight, his dignity intact despite the handcuffs. "Tasha," he said calmly. "Call Jackson at the firm. He'll know what to do." "Enough talk," Mallister snapped, shoving Darius toward the door. "I want to know where you're taking him." "I have a right," Tasha said, her voice cracking slightly. "You have the right to leave this diner before I find a reason to arrest you too," Cotton replied mildly. "Take your boy home, ma'am. We'll contact you when appropriate." Tasha and Malik watched helplessly as Darius was led out to a patrol car. The morning sun seemed to mock the scene with its cheerful rays, glinting off the handcuffs and the sheriff's star with the same indifferent brightness. Cotton followed them out, but paused beside Mallister in the parking lot. The two men stood close, their voices low and private. "County 4 is off the main grid," Cotton murmured. "No cameras, no records. Keep him there until I say different." His cold eyes tracked Darius being placed in the back of the patrol car. "We bury this deep. He doesn't walk out unless I give the word." "Understood," Mallister nodded, a mean smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Yes, sir. Understood." Completely. The patrol car pulled away, taking Darius toward the remote substation. Inside the diner, Tasha held Malik close, her mind already working, calculating, remembering every detail. She watched as the sheriff's black SUV followed the patrol car. Both vehicles disappeared around a bend in the road. The motel room's air conditioner rattled and wheezed, barely cutting through the thick Georgia heat. Tasha sat on the edge of the sagging bed, her phone pressed to her ear, listening to yet another endless ring. Beside her, Malik paced the worn carpet, his footsteps making the same six-step pattern over and over. "Nothing?" Malik asked, his voice tight with frustration as Tasha lowered the phone. She shook her head. "That's the 5th law firm. Not even voicemail." Her voice cracked slightly. "Something's wrong. They can't all be closed on a Sunday evening." Malik's fists clenched, his anger simmering. "They're blocking us, just like Dad's friend Jackson. His number won't even connect anymore." The cheap digital clock on the nightstand blinked 7:43 p.m. in harsh red numbers. Hours had passed, and as the sun sank lower, so did their hope. Empty coffee cups and untouched sandwich wrappers littered the small table by the window. "Try the ACLU again," Malik suggested, his hands running through his hair, the gesture nervous and familiar. It reminded Tasha so much of Darius that it made her chest ache. "I did 20 minutes ago. Same thing," she said, exhaustion creeping into her voice. "Rings forever, then drops." Tasha stood up, her teacher's instincts kicking in despite the weight of their situation. "Sit down, baby. You're wearing yourself out." "I can't sit!" Malik's voice rose in frustration. "They've had Dad for 12 hours. No phone call, no lawyer, nothing. We don't even know where this County 4 place is. It's not on any map." A sharp knock at their door made both of them jump. "Management," a voice called out. Tasha opened the door to find Mr. Peters, the motel manager who had checked them in that morning. His previously professional demeanor had vanished, replaced by barely concealed hostility. "Is there a problem?" Tasha asked, keeping her voice steady. "Several complaints about noise," Peters said, though the rooms on either side of theirs were empty. "And there's an issue with your credit card." "What issue?" "We paid for 3 nights," Tasha replied, confusion creeping into her voice. "Card's showing decline now," Peters said, crossing his arms. "We'll need cash or you'll have to leave." Malik stepped forward, disbelief in his voice. "That's impossible. Our card is fine." "Don't take that tone with me, boy," Peters snapped, and Malik flinched, the echo of Mallister's words from that morning ringing in his ears. Tasha felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. This wasn't coincidence. "We'll find somewhere else," Tasha said quietly, trying to stay calm. "Good idea." Peter's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You have 30 minutes to clear out." The door slammed shut with unnecessary force. Tasha leaned against it, closing her eyes for a moment. "Pack up, Malik, quickly." "Mom, this is crazy. They can't just—" "They can, and they are." Tasha moved quickly, gathering their things. The sheriff has more power here than we realized. He's making sure we can't stay, can't get help." They packed in tense silence, jumping at every sound from outside. Tasha tried their credit card at 3 other motels in town, all suddenly full despite their vacant parking lots. The sun had fully set now, and they were left standing in a gas station parking lot, the SUV idling beside them. "What do we do?" Malik's voice was small, younger than his 17 years. Before Tasha could answer, a gentle tap on her window made them both jump. A black woman in her 50s stood there, her expression kind but cautious. She held up both hands to show she meant no harm. Tasha lowered the window slightly. "Yes, I'm Jada Freeman. I own the Freedom Cup Cafe downtown." The woman's voice was low and steady. "I saw what happened at my place this morning. Been looking for you folks." Tasha's hand tightened on the steering wheel. "Why?" "Because I recognized your husband." Jada glanced around the parking lot before continuing. "I was at a veterans event last year where he spoke about security consulting, but more importantly, I know what Cotton and his boys are doing to you right now." The blocked calls, the credit cards, the sudden no vacancy signs. Some of the tension eased from Tasha's shoulders. Finally, someone who understood. "I've got hot food in my car," Jada continued, "and a safe place where you can stay tonight, somewhere they won't think to look." "Why help us?" Malik asked, leaning forward. "Won't you get in trouble?" A fierce smile crossed Jada's face. "Honey, I've been documenting Cotton's abuse for 3 years. Your daddy's case might be exactly what we need to bring it all down." She stepped back, gesturing to her car. "Follow me. Food's getting cold and we've got a lot to talk about." Tasha studied the woman's face, reading the sincerity there, the quiet strength. After hours of doors closing in their faces, here was one opening wide. "Lead the way," Tasha said, starting the engine. Jada nodded once, understanding all that wasn't said. As they pulled out of the parking lot, following her sensible sedan through the darkening streets, Tasha felt the first stirring of hope since that morning. They weren't alone anymore. And hope, she knew from experience, could be the most powerful weapon of all. Morning light filtered through the curtains of Jada's apartment, above her cafe, casting warm stripes across a table covered in manila folders and newspaper clippings. The smell of fresh coffee and biscuits wafted up from the kitchen below. 3 years of documented incidents, Jada explained, spreading out the papers. Traffic stops that turned violent, mysterious overnight jail stays, people losing jobs after filing complaints. She tapped a particularly thick folder, all involving Sheriff Cotton or his deputies. Tasha picked up a photograph from the pile of papers Jada had laid out in front of her. It showed a young black man with a badly bruised face, the kind of damage that left a mark long after it healed. "Why hasn't anyone stopped this?" she asked quietly, her fingers trembling as she turned the picture over. "Because Cotton's got connections," Jada answered, refilling their mugs with coffee. "State politicians, judges, business owners, they're all tangled up in his web. Anyone who speaks up ends up facing trumped-up charges or worse." Malik, who had been unusually quiet all morning, leaned forward. "But you kept collecting evidence anyway." "Someone has to," Jada said firmly. "I started after they roughed up my nephew during a traffic stop, planted drugs in his car, tried to give him 10 years. We got lucky. We had video proving the officer planted the evidence, but the footage disappeared from evidence, and the department cleared themselves of wrongdoing." She pulled out her phone, tapped a few times, and handed it to Tasha. "Speaking of footage, this is from yesterday." The video was grainy, filmed from across the diner, but it was clear enough. Mallister grabbing Malik, Darius's calm but controlled response, and the ID falling to the floor. Most importantly, it showed Mallister ignoring Darius's credentials and escalating the situation. "This is exactly what we need," Tasha said, her teacher's voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "But we'll need a lawyer who won't back down when Cotton applies pressure." "What about cousin Marcus?" Malik's suggestion hung in the air. "Marcus Turner. He handles civil rights cases in Atlanta." Tasha was already pulling out her phone, dialing quickly. He's far enough away that Cotton can't touch him easily, she muttered under her breath. The phone rang, and she held her breath. Unlike yesterday's calls, this one connected. "Cousin Marcus, it's Tasha Samuels," she said, taking a deep breath. "We need your help. Darius has been arrested." As Tasha explained the situation, Jada and Malik listened closely. Marcus's responses grew increasingly concerned. "They're holding him without charges?" His voice was sharp, and Tasha quickly switched the call to speakerphone. "That's illegal," Marcus continued. "They have to either charge him or release him within 48 hours. Sheriff Cotton's keeping it off the books," Jada cut in, stepping forward with her own insight. "I'm Jada Freeman. I've been documenting similar cases." "Ms. Freeman, I've heard about your work," Marcus said, his tone shifting to professional interest. "If you have evidence of a pattern combined with this new footage, we could build something significant. But first, we need to get Darius out. Can you help?" Tasha's voice softened but remained firm. "We'll try to see him, establish that they're denying access, document everything." They ended the call, and Jada immediately stood. "I'll drive. They know my car, but they're used to seeing me around. Less suspicious than your SUV." The county jail sat on the outskirts of town, a squat brick building surrounded by chain-link fence topped with razor wire. The parking lot was nearly empty when they arrived, save for a few patrol cars and a prisoner transport van. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as they approached the front desk. The deputy looked up lazily, but recognition flickered in his eyes when he saw Jada. "We're here to visit Darius Samuels," Tasha said firmly. The deputy picked up his phone without breaking eye contact. A moment later, heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor. Sheriff Cotton emerged, his badge gleaming under the harsh lights, a cold smile on his face. "Mrs. Samuels," he drawled, his voice oozing with insincerity, "I'm afraid your husband isn't available for visitors." "He has the right to see his family," Tasha countered, standing her ground. "Not while he's under investigation." Cotton's smile didn't waver. "No visitors." "Investigation for what?" Malik stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "You haven't even charged him with anything." Cotton's gaze shifted to Malik, his eyes narrowing, something dangerous flickering behind them. "Boy, you do well to mind your tone in my jail." Tasha placed a steadying hand on Malik's shoulder, feeling the tension radiate through him. Jada moved closer, her presence silent but powerful. "We have a lawyer," Tasha said evenly. "He'll be filing motions today." "File whatever you like." Cotton spread his hands mockingly. "But right now, Mr. Samuels is unavailable. No visitors." Malik's fists tightened further, his knuckles white with restraint. Tasha squeezed his shoulder, knowing they'd gotten what they came for. Proof of Cotton's obstruction. But standing there, watching the sheriff's smug satisfaction, knowing Darius was somewhere in this building and they couldn't reach him, took every ounce of her self-control not to scream. The cell was 8 feet by 10. Darius knew, because he'd measured it in careful heel-toe steps during his first hour there. No windows, just a narrow slot in the metal door that let in strips of fluorescent light from the corridor. The air smelled of bleach and old concrete. He sat cross-legged on the thin mattress, back straight, hands resting loosely on his knees. To anyone watching through the security camera mounted in the corner, he looked defeated, compliant. Exactly what they wanted to see. But Darius's mind was working, processing, analyzing, just like they'd taught him in SEAL training, just like he'd practiced during P simulations. Every sound, every pattern, every detail mattered. The tap, tap, tap of the guard's boots echoed down the corridor, signaling the beginning of another routine. Darius noted the uneven rhythm, one leg favoring more than the other, probably the same guard who had brought lunch earlier, carrying a turkey sandwich with mayo. The sound was calculated, like they were doing him a favor. Darius counted the steps, 312 from the main security door to his cell, with 2 checkpoint gates in between. Click. The camera in the corner adjusted slightly, the sweep left to right every 47 seconds, with a 3-second pause at each end. The housing was loose, probably from years of humidity and neglect, a small detail, but one that could save his life. He closed his eyes, adopting the appearance of someone meditating. In reality, he was building a mental map of his surroundings. The guard rotation changed every 8 hours. 3 different walk patterns. The limping guard who kept strict time, the younger one who dawdled near the cells, and the night shift guy who wore squeaky boots and whistled country songs. The ventilation system kicked in with a rattle, and Darius counted 17 seconds of noise, perfect cover for any small movements. He had noticed a loose wire in his bed frame during his first careful inspection, a 6-inch thin piece of metal barely visible unless you knew where to look. When the vents hummed again, Darius shifted position. To the camera, it looked like simple stretching, but his fingers worked quickly, extracting the wire with practiced precision. He kept it hidden against his palm as he resumed his cross-legged pose. Squeak, squeak. The night shift guard was starting early, but Darius waited through 3 more camera sweeps, timing his movements with the ventilation noise. The wire, bent just so, would create a subtle distortion in the camera's field of view, enough to create blind spots if needed. Not enough to trigger alarms, but enough to give him a chance. His thoughts drifted to Tasha and Malik, their faces in the diner, the fear in their eyes when Mallister grabbed Malik, the fury when Cotton ordered Darius into custody. The memory made his jaw tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. Cameras were always watching. Tap, shuffle, tap. New footsteps, unfamiliar rhythm. Darius's senses sharpened. The steps paused outside his door. Keys jingled, but the door didn't open. "Chow time," a voice called out, quiet but clear. Military cadence in those words, not local law enforcement. Darius didn't move. The food slot opened with a metallic scrape, and a tray appeared, sliding through with precise movement. Professional, controlled. "Roger that," Darius responded, matching the tone. A test, maybe, or a message. The guard's shadow shifted. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I know who you are." Darius remained still, every nerve alert. The guard continued, his words measured and deliberate. 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines, Afghanistan, 2009. "We heard about you there." A long pause. Darius could hear other guards chatting far down the corridor. The camera whirred through another sweep. "Don't give up," the guard murmured. "Some of us are still watching." The food slot closed with a soft click. The footsteps retreated, measured and steady. Darius listened until they faded completely, his mind already processing this new information. Not all allies wore obvious uniforms. He picked up the tray, noting how the sandwich was placed, slightly off-center, covering something. A folded scrap of paper, barely larger than a fortune cookie slip. He palmed it smoothly, using his body to block the camera's view. The ventilation kicked in again. 17 seconds of cover. Darius used 12 of them to secure the wire in place, creating a subtle blur in the camera's sweep. The remaining 5 seconds were enough to slip the paper into a small tear he'd made in the mattress seam. Night was falling outside. Not that he could see it, but he could feel it in the changing rhythms of the jail, the subtle shift in guard patterns. In his cell, Darius maintained his pose of meditation. To anyone watching, he appeared resigned to his situation. They didn't need to know about the wire or the paper or the precise map he'd built in his mind. They didn't need to know that every apparent sign of submission was, in reality, a calculation. That's what they'd taught him in SEALs. The best position is the one your enemy doesn't know you're taking. The night guard's squeaky boots approached, right on schedule. Darius counted the steps, adding them to his mental blueprint. In the corner, the camera swept back and forth, its view now slightly distorted in ways only he would notice. He waited, patient and alert, while the jail settled into its nighttime routine. Jada's cafe was closed for the night, but light still spilled from its windows onto the empty street. Inside, she sat at a corner table with Tasha and Malik, her laptop open between them. The video from the diner played on the screen, grainy but clear enough to show what happened. "Are you sure about this?" Tasha asked, her hands wrapped tight around a cooling mug of tea. "What if they retaliate?" Jada's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "They're already retaliating, keeping Darius locked up without charges. That's their retaliation. But they can't hide from this." Malik leaned forward, his face lit by the screen's glow. "Do it, Ms. Freeman. People need to see what really happened." The video showed everything. Malister's aggressive approach, his hand grabbing Malik, Darius's controlled response. Most importantly, it captured the moment when Darius's ID fell, when the diner patrons realized who he was. Jada took a deep breath and clicked upload. The progress bar filled slowly. Rural Georgia internet wasn't known for its speed. When it finished, she shared it on every platform she could think of: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. "Now we wait," she said. But they didn't have to wait long. Within the first hour, the video had thousands of views. Comments flooded in. "Did that cop just try to assault a Navy SEAL's son? Look how calm the father stayed. That's training right there." Tasha's phone started buzzing as soon as the interview ended. Text messages from friends, then calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Jada's cafe phone rang too, the Atlanta reporter wanting details. "It's working," Malik said, scrolling through his phone. "People are sharing it everywhere. Darius is starting to trend." Jada's laptop chimed with email notifications, media requests pouring in from local news, national networks, online publications. They all wanted the same thing: an interview with the family. "We need to be smart about this," Jada said, sorting through the messages. "Pick the right outlet. Tell the story right." She paused on one email. "Here, this producer from News 1. They've covered police misconduct before. Did good work with it." Tasha read the email over her shoulder. The producer wanted to do a live interview via Zoom during a primetime slot. They'd show the video and let Tasha tell their story. "I'll do it," Tasha said, her voice steady now. Anger was replacing her fear. They need to know who they're messing with. They spent the next hours preparing. Jada helped Tasha practice what to say, how to stay focused on the facts. Malik found photos of his father in uniform, images from award ceremonies that the public needed to see. The interview was set for 9 p.m. They used Jada's office, making sure the backdrop looked professional. Tasha sat straight in front of the laptop, wearing her best blazer. Under the desk, her hands were shaking, but her face showed nothing but determination. The host's face appeared on screen. "We're here with Tasha Samuels, wife of former Navy SEAL Darius Samuels, who was arrested yesterday in what appears to be a racially motivated incident. Mrs. Samuels, can you tell us what happened?" Tasha told the story clearly, just as they'd practiced. When she described Malister grabbing Malik, her voice didn't waver. When she explained how Darius defended their son, she emphasized his control, his professionalism, and your husband's military background, the host prompted. This was the moment they'd planned for. Tasha nodded to Malik, who sent the files to the producer. Images filled the screen, Darius in dress uniform receiving honors. Darius shaking hands with 2 different presidents. Darius with his SEAL team, faces blurred for security. "My husband served this country for 20 years, Tasha said. "He received the Silver Star for valor in combat. He trained other SEALs in advanced tactical response, and now he's being held without charges because he protected our son from police harassment." Social media exploded. Viewers shared the interview in real time. New hashtags emerged. Unsealed Justice Veterans, Persecuted Free Darius. The viewer count climbed past 100,000, then 500,000. In Jada's office, they watched the numbers grow. Messages of support flooded in from veterans groups, civil rights organizations, military families. The story was spreading faster than anyone could control. "Look," Malik said, showing them his phone. "Their small town is trending nationally. People are asking questions about Sheriff Cotton, about Mallister's record, about the history of police conduct in the area." Tasha stared at the screen, watching the view count rise, watching their private injustice become a public outcry. In her mind, she pictured Darius in his cell, not knowing any of this was happening. Not yet. The host's voice brought her attention back to the interview. "Mrs. Samuels, what do you want people to know about your husband?" Tasha looked directly into the camera. Behind her, Jada and Malik stood like sentinels, their faces set with shared purpose. The world was watching now. The truth was out. There was no going back. Sheriff Dale Cotton stood in his office, watching the interview replay on his computer screen. His face was tight, jaw clenched. Behind him, Officer Mallister paced like a caged animal. 500,000 views, Cotton muttered, clicking through social media posts. "And climbing." He slammed his laptop shut. "This ends now." 20 minutes later, Cotton's cruiser pulled up in front of Jada's cafe. The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty street. He adjusted his badge, making sure it caught the light just right. Inside, Jada was setting up for the breakfast rush. She looked up when the bell chimed, her expression hardening when she saw who it was. "We're not open yet, Sheriff," she said. Cotton smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He walked slowly around the cafe, running his finger along the table surface. "Nice place you got here, Ms. Freeman. Be a shame if the health department found some violations." Jada continued wiping down the counter, her movements deliberate. "Everything's up to code. Just passed inspection last month." "Inspections can be unpredictable," Cotton leaned against the counter. "Like those property taxes you're behind on." "I'm not behind on anything," Jada said, but her hand tightened on the cleaning cloth. "Records can be confusing." Cotton's voice was soft, almost friendly. "Sometimes payments get lost. Computer errors happen, especially when business owners start causing trouble." Jada put down the cloth and faced him directly. "Are you threatening me, Sheriff?" "Just having a friendly chat about civic responsibility." He pulled out his phone, showing her a screen full of her social media posts. "Seems like you've been spreading some misleading information." "You mean the truth?" Jada's voice was steady, but her heart hammered. "That video shows exactly what happened." "Speaking of videos," Cotton said, "Officer Mallister's body cam tells a different story. It's being released to the media right now." As if on cue, Jada's phone buzzed. A local news site had posted a new video, grainy body cam footage showing Darius appearing to lunge at Mallister. The angles were odd, the audio scratchy. "That's not what happened," Jada said, her voice firm. "Anyone who was there knows it. It's official police evidence." Cotton straightened up, adjusting his belt, his eyes narrowing. "Unlike some shaky cell phone video taken by troublemakers." Outside, a news van pulled up. Cotton smiled again, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Looks like they want your comment on the new footage." Jada's hand tightened around her phone as she glanced at it. "Choose your words carefully, Ms. Freeman. Businesses need community support to survive." He walked out just as reporters began setting up their cameras. Jada's phone buzzed again, this time with messages from people who had been at the diner, pointing out issues with Mallister's video. "The lighting's wrong. Where's the sound of the coffee maker? That's not even the right table layout." The messages read. Jada began screenshotting the messages, documenting everything. Her hands shook slightly, but her resolve strengthened. She'd seen too many people bullied into silence. This time, they would fight back. Across town, in a small office building, two men in suits checked into a hotel under bland, forgettable names. Their credentials, carefully tucked away, identified them as FBI agents. They'd driven unmarked cars from Atlanta, arriving separately to avoid attention. The younger agent unpacked his laptop, connecting to a secure network. Local chatter's picking up. Sheriff's Department is trying to control the narrative. His partner, older and grayer, nodded. DOJ Civil Rights Division wants this handled quietly for now. We observe, we document, we build the case. They pulled up Mallister's personnel file. Complaints buried, witnesses pressured, patterns emerging. The younger agent whistled softly. 15 years of this, all swept under the rug. Not anymore, his partner replied, adding another document to their growing file. Get the forensics team ready for the body cam footage. We'll need to prove tampering. In his cell, Darius sat cross-legged on his bunk, eyes closed, but his senses were alert. He had counted 3 new sets of footsteps in the corridor. Different rhythm, different weight distribution than the usual guards. The friendly guard passed by doing his rounds. A folded note slipped under Darius's door with his lunch tray. Darius waited until the footsteps faded before retrieving it. The message was brief. They're here. Be ready. He allowed himself a small smile, then ate his lunch slowly, methodically. Years of training had taught him patience. The time would come. For now, he waited, listening to the changing patterns of movement outside his cell, feeling the shift in the air. The note was shredded into tiny pieces, mixed with his food waste. No evidence, no traces, just like they taught him in SEAL training. Everything had its time, its purpose. Even being in this cell was part of a larger strategy now, one that was finally coming together. Sheriff Cotton burst through the jail's security doors, his face flushed red with anger. He jabbed his finger at the control panel, punching in the emergency lockdown code. "Nobody in or out," he barked at the deputies. "I want all exterior doors sealed. No visitors, no lawyers, no press." He pulled out his phone, fingers trembling as he dialed. "Get the transport van ready. We're moving the seal." Alarms blared through the corridors. Heavy metal doors slammed shut with echoing finality. Guards rushed to their positions, radios crackling with confused chatter. In his cell, Darius sat perfectly still, counting the irregular footsteps echoing down the hallway. 3 guards running east, 2 more heading to the main entrance. A set of heavier boots, Cotton himself, pacing near the control room. Something had spooked them. Darius closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing. He'd seen this pattern before in hostile territories when an operation was about to go sideways. The sudden surge of activity, the poorly concealed panic. They were trying to move him. The friendly guard, Johnson, appeared at his cell, pretending to do a routine check. His eyes met Darius's for a fraction of a second. "Medical check in 10 minutes, Johnson announced loudly for the benefit of the cameras. Then, barely a whisper, "Feds at the front gate. Cotton's trying to get you out the back." Darius gave an imperceptible nod, his muscles tensed, ready. He'd mapped every corner of this place, memorized every guard rotation. Now it was time to use that knowledge. 5 minutes later, Darius started his performance. He stumbled to his feet, swaying dramatically. His breakfast tray clattered to the floor. He pressed one hand against the wall, letting his knees buckle. "Help!" Johnson called out right on cue. "Prisoner down!" The response was immediate. 2 deputies rushed to the cell, followed by Cotton himself. They found Darius on the floor, breathing heavily, clutching his chest. "Get him to the infirmary," Cotton ordered, voice tight with urgency. "And keep it quiet. Last thing we need is more attention." They cuffed Darius before helping him up. Johnson and another deputy supported him between them, half dragging him toward the infirmary. Cotton followed close behind, barking orders into his radio. "That's not what happened," Jada said. "Anyone who was there knows it. It's official police evidence." Cotton straightened, adjusting his belt. Unlike some shaky cell phone video taken by troublemakers. Outside, a news van pulled up, and Cotton smiled again. "Looks like they want your comment on the new footage." Jada's phone buzzed again, and she glanced at the messages from people who had been at the diner, pointing out the issues with Mallister's video. The lighting's wrong. Where's the sound of the coffee maker? That's not even the right table layout. Jada started screenshotting the messages, documenting everything. Her hands shook, but her resolve strengthened. She'd seen too many people bullied into silence. This time, they would fight back. Across town, 2 men in suits checked into a hotel under bland names, their credentials carefully tucked away. They were FBI agents, working quietly in the background. The younger agent unpacked his laptop, connecting to a secure network. Local chatter's picking up. Sheriff's Department is trying to control the narrative. His older partner nodded. DOJ's Civil Rights Division wants this handled quietly for now. We observe, we document, we build the case. They opened Mallister's personnel file. Complaints buried, witnesses pressured, patterns emerging. The younger agent whistled softly. 15 years of this, all swept under the rug. Not anymore, the older agent replied. Get the forensics team ready for the body cam footage. We'll need to prove tampering. In his cell, Darius sat cross-legged on his bunk, eyes closed, but senses sharp. He'd counted 3 new sets of footsteps in the corridor, different rhythm, different weight distribution than the usual guards. The friendly guard passed by doing his rounds. A folded note slipped under Darius's door with his lunch tray. Darius waited until the footsteps faded before retrieving the note. It was brief. They're here. Be ready. He allowed himself a small smile, then ate his lunch slowly, methodically. Years of training had taught him patience. The time would come. For now he waited, listening to the changing patterns of movement outside his cell, feeling the shift in the air. The note was shredded into tiny pieces and mixed with his food waste. No evidence, no traces, just like they taught him in SEAL training. Everything had its time, its purpose. Even being in this cell was part of a larger strategy now, one that was finally coming together. Sheriff Cotton burst through the jail's security doors, his face flushed red with anger. He jabbed his finger at the control panel, punching in the emergency lockdown code. "Nobody in or out," he barked at the deputies. "I want all exterior doors sealed. No visitors, no lawyers, no press." He pulled out his phone, fingers trembling as he dialed. "Get the transport van ready. We're moving the seal." Alarms blared through the corridors. Heavy metal doors slammed shut with echoing finality. Guards rushed to their positions, radios crackling with confused chatter. In his cell, Darius sat perfectly still, counting the irregular footsteps echoing down the hallway. 3 guards running east, 2 more heading to the main entrance, a set of heavier boots. Cotton himself, pacing near the control room. Something had spooked them. Darius closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing. He'd seen this pattern before in hostile territories when an operation was about to go sideways. The sudden surge of activity, the poorly concealed panic. They were trying to move him. The friendly guard, Johnson, appeared at his cell, pretending to do a routine check. His eyes met Darius's for a fraction of a second. "Medical check in 10 minutes, Johnson announced loudly, for the benefit of the cameras. Then, barely a whisper, "Feds at the front gate. Cotton's trying to get you out the back." Darius gave an imperceptible nod, his muscles tensed, ready. He'd mapped every corner of this place, memorized every guard rotation. Now it was time to use that knowledge. 5 minutes later, Darius started his performance. He stumbled to his feet, swaying dramatically. His breakfast tray clattered to the floor. He pressed one hand against the wall, letting his knees buckle. "Help!" Johnson called out right on cue. "Prisoner down!" The response was immediate. 2 deputies rushed to the cell, followed by Cotton himself. They found Darius on the floor, breathing heavily, clutching his chest. "Get him to the infirmary," Cotton ordered, voice tight with urgency. "And keep it quiet. Last thing we need is more attention." They cuffed Darius before helping him up. Johnson and another deputy supported him between them, half dragging him toward the infirmary. Cotton followed close behind, barking orders into his radio. The transport van pulled up in front of Jada's cafe. She hadn't seen Cotton's cruiser yet, but the sheriff had no idea that the situation was quickly spiraling out of his control. Darius emerged, still in cuffs, flanked by federal agents. He walked tall, his eyes scanning the area while cameras flashed all around him. His family was waiting. As the crowd of reporters shouted questions, Darius held his head high, allowing the handcuffs to tell their own story. Every camera captured the image of a decorated Navy SEAL, illegally detained, emerging with dignity intact. Behind him, Cotton was now in cuffs, his carefully constructed empire crumbling under the weight of the truth. In the hotel room, Malik sat on the bed, gripping his mother's hand as they watched the footage of Darius standing at the podium. The camera flashes illuminated his father's face, making him appear every bit the hero he was. Malik's chest tightened with a mix of pride and pain. His father looked exactly like what he was, someone who had served with honor, yet had been treated like a criminal. Darius began, his voice steady and clear. "Good afternoon. My name is Senior Chief Petty Officer Darius Samuels, United States Navy, retired. I've served this country through 4 combat deployments. I've bled for it. I've watched brothers die for it." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "And last week, I was illegally detained in my own country for protecting my son from racial harassment." The camera shutters clicked rapidly. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised. "They didn't break me," Darius continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "But they've been breaking people like me forever." Malik felt tears rolling down his face, remembering the helplessness of watching his father in handcuffs, the rage and the fear. For 3 days, they had held him without charges, no phone call, no lawyer, just threats. Back at the jail, the FBI agents moved quickly, securing the scene and taking photographs. Cotton, dazed and angry, was led away in federal custody, his carefully crafted image of untouchable authority shattered. Inside the federal vehicles, Agent Sarah Chen and Agent Marcus Rodriguez exchanged a quiet glance as they watched the last of the sheriff's operation crumble. It was done. Justice had taken its time, but it had come. Darius and Tasha sat on their front porch swing, watching Malik load boxes into his car. Stanford acceptance letter proudly displayed on the dashboard. Engineering scholarship. A future bright with possibility. Tasha leaned against her husband's shoulder, her eyes on their son. "Look at him," she said softly. "Remember how scared we were that night in the motel? Not knowing if you'd come home?" Darius squeezed her hand, his voice calm but resolute. "We didn't just survive. We made them see us. That's a win." Malik approached, holding up a box. "Found Dad's old SEAL photos. Think I can hang one in my dorm?" "Only if you hang one of your speech too," Tasha insisted. "The one where you announced the scholarship program." Their laughter carried across the yard, free and unafraid. No looking over shoulders, no swallowing pride to stay safe. Just family, just joy, just the future they'd fought to create. As the sun set, the town had transformed. Jada's Cafe had become a symbol of resistance and renewal, a place where hope had taken root and spread. The Confederate flag that once loomed in the diner lay crumpled in a puddle, a forgotten relic of the past. Inside the community center, Malik stood at the podium, his voice steady. "My story isn't unique. What happened to me happens every day, but what we did about it, that's what matters." He gestured to the kids learning self-defense, to the computers where they studied civil rights law. "We don't teach hate here," Malik said. "We teach pride, strategy, how to stand up without getting knocked down. My father showed me that strength isn't about muscles, it's about mind and heart." As Malik finished his speech, the audience applauded. A new day had begun in their town, one built on courage, community, and the unshakable resolve to never be silenced again.